I teach all the time on Zoom, and I just finished 2 classes before we met. And so, hi everybody. Should I just start? Or?
Yes, 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 absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to say hi and thank you to Susan for having me. I'm thankful that I was invited by Del Rio to join the 6 Foot Photo Project a couple of weeks ago. And I'm sort of an infrequent photographer that pops in and out every now and again, but I think some of you guys have been coming pretty consistently since the very beginning. And so I'm really honored that I've been invited. So thank you, I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I also have this thing, I just wanted to sort of like put this out there, and I could really use your help with it. When I teach, I have no problem public speaking. I don't even quiver, even just a little bit. But when I start to talk about my personal work, I like go right into crying. Like, I don't know what it is, but it's like, well, it's like I gave this artist talk in Venice, and I was like, I begged somebody just to make a joke with me so that I could just settle down and feel like I'm having a conversation. Because the most intimidating part of these things just feels like you suddenly get in your head after a certain amount of words, and you feel like you're in a bit of a vacuum. So I really would appreciate if I could start to quiver, if you guys just are kind enough to just look over it and maybe even pop in and give me a little bit of feedback so that I can engage in a conversation with an actual human. I'd really, really appreciate it. So Susan and I were talking the other day about what, we thought would benefit talking about here. There's a format to my presentations about my artwork, but I really feel like I'm completely honored to speak to other photographers and to people that I know that are already aware of the processes that I do. So in a way, I would love to just make this more of like, I'm going to show you like why I led into doing the work the way I do it. And then sort of like, I kind of want to have a bit of an open dialogue about what you think about these hybrid multimedia projects, because I think that I'm just going to lead by saying the way that I do these projects is more to sort of get out of the construct of what a normal documentary would be, which is either still photography and audio, or video that's actual film footage of people in their element, and then some still photography as support. And it's always like really slick, and sometimes it's rough around the edges, but it sometimes is relatively straightforward in the material and ways that we work it. And I'm finding, and what I'm getting to is sort of the fact that I allow for there to be flexibility and low fidelity to it. It really opens up the possibilities. And that idea of opening it up to different ideas really engages the community that I'm actually working with too, because they become a little bit part of the dialogue and the decision making in a way. So actually, you know what? I'd have to remember, what's my time limit? I should probably.
Yeah, so we're here from 7 to 8:30, and then sometimes we run a little over, but so it's not a hard, fast stop, but it's generally about an hour and a half with about a half hour left for questions.
Okay. I actually see one of my former students here. Hi, Sophia. She knows how I can get going, so please interrupt me at like 8:15 if it seems like I'm not going to stop talking.
Oh, no, you're doing great. I actually had one quick question right off the bat, just to see if I was getting clear on what you were saying. So are you saying, go ahead.
I don't see it recording yet.
It is, yeah.
It is? Oh, okay, good.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Well, I heard you saying the thing about the low fidelity, and I was wondering if what you were suggesting is that by letting go of these ideas of perfection, that it actually opens up more space for the community, because if you have to keep it perfect, there's a way everything's so tight and controlled.
Yes.
But by letting go of that perfection, it actually makes more space for the collaboration.
I have that in my notes right here. That is exactly the trajectory I'm about to take you all on.
Cool.
Because I mean, I think I have a dossier that I'm going to show you. I'm going to go through it very quickly. But before I go through that, I want to give you a little bit of background as to where I began. I went to school at NYU. It was all film, and I had some of the most talented artists as my teachers. And I mean, Fred Richin, who was the pictures editor for the New York Times Magazine, was literally my teacher. And I would go into class and I would be like, yo, Fred, what's up? Like, why are there no comics in the New York Times? Like, explain that to me. And so, like, even in the beginning, I was sort of challenging this sort of structure that was sort of like imposed about how serious, like, journalism is. Now, I appreciate the quality of that and the serious nature of it so much so that, like, I graduated, I became a photo assistant, and I worked for one of the most strict photographers in Philadelphia. His name is Stephen Hone. And for 7 years, I worked by his side as an apprentice, and we worked on 8x10 film, and he had like the aptitude of Ansel Adams. And so that was like a really, really strict regimen of working every day with him. And he worked in 8x10 transparency and then converted over to digital. So I actually had this like high-end advertising background where everything was super meticulous and on point. Deadlines were met, production, everything was marching order. And that moved into digital. And so I gained this confidence that which allowed me to move back to New York, and I began to work at the Met. And the Met hadn't transitioned over to digital just yet, but here I was entering into working on what is called the Timeline of Our History, which is an online collegiate reference. It's still available online, and it had over 20,000 image assets on it. And about 75% of those images were they were post-produced by me and another imaging specialist. So I came in and I had these marching orders for that project that included high-end photography, whereas as I entered into the Met was thinking of digital as a throwaway medium at the time. So this is like 2001. And they were, you know, our photo studio was delivering digital files to us that was like 10K. And so if you had a 10K image file, you had no future for that file. And I knew that. So I brought this really high-end, high-quality retouching to the online features. And of course, as you know, the boat began to right itself, and everybody started to realize that digital was where everything in high quality was going. So there was a large investment in it later in my career there. So everything that I do commercially is with this high-end, high quality approach. So my like freelance life is living in that world. That being said, it was because of that rigidity that I was beginning to just sort of feel like I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't ever get out of I didn't have a lot, like I didn't have an appreciation for Instagram. And I'm sure you guys all can relate to that. When Instagram first came out, I was like, oh, so everybody's a photographer. Yeah, you know, and like this program, this software program is basically like compressing the file and destroying it. And then it dawned on me, and because I was working in online features, it literally dawned on me to use that medium to see what would happen to my digital files as I uploaded them, because Instagram actually would do an upload and a double compression, as well as like applying their filters to it. So it was like a degradation of the digital file. And suddenly I was working the system that was supposedly working me. And I just like took it and I ran with it in a very serial fashion. So I started this project that was called Subway Series. And that has like that's a term that New Yorkers use when the Mets play the Yankees and they can get on the subway and go backwards and forwards. But I started to do these like daily photographs that were on the subway in mimicking Walker Evans's subway passengers. And then I made it into something that was like, it had 3 major criteria. It always had to be photographed straight on. It always had to be converted to this ink. It's called an inkwell filter, and it's the black and white filter. And I had to do it daily for an entire year. And it really, like at the time, Instagram wasn't allowing it to be full frame. So, and it would apply like a border to it. So I had to like fit a square peg in a round hole sometimes. but it was pretty cool. And the best part about it, since it was like in the beginning of Instagram, is that allowed me to reach out to a community that really responded to these mutual shared experience, like these very human experiences. And at the time, there was only a few people that photographed on the subway, and we immediately connected around the world. And like, I know that phenomenon is really like taken for granted at the moment, but you can understand that there's like this sort of like opening of my mind to the idea of not having to work in high quality. So like, that's just like a preface to why I'm working in this like multimedia format, and in the idea of sort of an accumulation of testimonials or experiences. So any questions so far? No? Okay, cool. I'm going to start to share my screen, so it's going to bug out real quick. And let's see if that works. Can you see that? Awesome. All right, so let's just go into the present mode. So I'm really going to breeze over this as fast as possible, because it's meant to be an entire talk about all the things that I do. But like I said, I really want to talk to you all about what your thoughts are about this like hybrid approach. So I'm a photographic artist, and these are some of the projects that that are kind of faded out in the background. This was Subway Series. This is Crossing Over Immigration Stories. And then this is a woman's right project that I started to do back in 2016. So a little bit of the background with the Met. So I was a photographer, an imaging director, and a producer. And as you can imagine, since it's like a nonprofit, they realized what I could do, and then gave me a ton of other things to do. And it was really hard to describe what my title was eventually. So I did a lot of things, but my most valued thing that I loved was when I was basically promoted to being able to photograph for online features. And I was really fortunate for that. And so some of the projects that I worked on are still up on the Met's website. And you can go to the art navigation and drag on down to online features and to Met publications as well, and the timeline of our history. And all of these were ongoing at the same time. So timeline of our history is still in production, and it started in 2001 and launched in 2005. It's a timeline of our history depicted through the Met's collection from prehistoric to present day. And basically you can navigate through the art world and the prominent work that was being done by either on the timeline or by like region, through country, or you could navigate through one of the departments at the Met, or you can navigate through the genre. And all of that's really like wonderful, because it has essays that are written by the curators and conservators and scholars, and this is all original content that was written for the timeline of our history. So I highly recommend you search through the photo department's essays. It's incredible. But then again, you can totally like go down a rabbit hole, because they also provide what was going on in history that would inform the artwork of that time period. So it's really fantastic. But so this is kind of what it looks like. This is the design. And as I mentioned, you can navigate through time, through region, and thematic category. But also, as you can see, there's a works of art area that you can do a search, and you can search for whatever you might be looking for, maybe Renaissance sculpture or contemporary paintings. And this is what it looks like as you navigate through the actual alphabetical list of artists or essays. And so onto the online features. I worked on Connections, One Met Many Worlds, the Artist Project. And so One Met Many Worlds was just like a project that we threw out there in the world for people to, it was actually sort of like a data accumulation, like a way to get people to keyword images and make it searchable by these keywords. And whoops, sorry. This is Connections. So Connections was the first series that was done in 100. We published 100 different features, and this was a representation of our staff at the Met, and they would talk about the artworks that really were memorable to them. And so for me, I did the imaging for this, but I also did the portraits for this project. And this is what it would look like when you navigated to a person's portrait and then went down in to see what they were talking about. So Michael Gallagher is the head of the painting conservation department. And then we have Andrew Bolton. I'm sure any of you pay attention to the fashion world, he's the person who organizes the Met Gala mostly. And him and Howard Koda do, well, Howard Koda retired, but Andrew Bolton's kind of a pretty big wig in the fashion, in the costume department. And so this is Met Collects. This is one of my favorite projects. What we did was we worked with the curators and the director to establish the 12 most important acquisitions of the Met that year. And then we would create a feature that sort of delved into what the actual pitch was to the board to collect the object. And then we would sometimes interview the actual curator to talk about what was so special about it. And you guys can see at the top, this is actually Irving Penn's Small Trades work. And we collected several that were used for the Paris Electric Company. And it was really, oh God, it was a stunning piece to do and photograph. It's all platinum prints, and it's just really a special time to work with Jeff Rosenheim, who's the head curator of the photographs department. So this is more examples of small trade, and this is the interface of that. And then we have 82nd and 5th at the Met, and this is the second project that I worked on that was a serial of interviews. And what we did was we interviewed 100 curators to talk about the most important object in the Met's collection that they connected with. And that was like such an amazing online feature, just to be like a fly on the wall during the interviews with the curators. But also I art directed with the photo studio photographers. There's an entire studio at the Met that has about like 11 professional photographers in their own studios, and they are the ones that are able to handle the objects. They're given permission and special training. I, on the other hand, focused on portraiture and sort of live event. I actually didn't photograph too many live events, but I did mostly portraiture and editorial style work that was for the online features. But because I was in charge of the imaging for each of these features, I got to work side by side with the photographers and plan out how we could present even like 2D objects as the 3D objects that they really are. In real life, even if it is 2D, it's something you can hold, and that was really important to depict. And I got to take the portraits of the curators, and I'm really proud to say that most of the curators still use these images for their LinkedIn and, and publications. It's kind of cool to do a search and see my name pop up for like the announcement of one of them becoming the head curator of something in like London or Paris. And so then the third feature that was more of like a serial was the artist project. And this is a photograph of Kehinde Wiley in the American wing of the Met. And this was like, oh my God, I just felt so privileged to do this because we got to photograph and work with 125 blue chip artists. And so I had an imaging specialist that was working next to me for this project. Her name's Catherine Herney, and she actually was able to photograph some of the artists, but I was able to photograph 111 of them. And for this particular project, the whole entire rollout of the video is all still images, and it's still photography of them moving around the galleries as we photograph them, and then still photography of the object, all intertwined with their audio. So what I'm leading you down the path is that I've gained this appreciation of using multiples of recordings to be the project, you know, as like, you know, like what the catalyst to doing work like this at the Met was it started at the timeline of art history. I mean, we literally had a meeting with my production crew, and we were like, we have all of these assets. We have high-end images that have been retouched already, and then we have all of this content. How can we repurpose it and use it for yet another feature, which was connections? And once we like sort of accomplished that, not only did we accomplish that on time, we accomplished it under budget. they realized that this kind of pattern, I'm going to reference my notes a little bit, sorry to look off camera, but we realized that the Met was able to do these projects in serial as like a testimonial to the importance of a couple of things. Like it was testimonial to the importance of the museum. Most nonprofits have to every year, you know, prove that they're valuable and that they need funding and that they should stay and remain alive. And you might not think that the Met has to do that, but every year they have to validate their existence. It's not that hard, but at the same time, if the rest of the world doesn't know about the collection, then in a way we lost out on that validation. So the beauty of the timeline is that we were accumulating all this feedback from all over the world. It's like, I live in Brazil and I know I'll never be able to travel to New York to see what's in your collection, but I have just spent like an entire 24 hours reading up on, you know, like, you know, Andy Warhol, and I could never have done that if you didn't do what you did. And then once we made connections, we even reached people in a different way, like through these personal stories of connection. And so that validated us even further. And not only that, it validated the digital world, which was already struggling to sort of gain validation because a lot of the curators were used to actually printing catalogs in print form. So then as we, you know, like completed connections, we also realized that it made our success and our reach quantifiable. And like, this is not probably surprising to you at all, because that's what data does. It basically provides statistics and analytics and makes reaction and absorption quantifiable. And, you know, as we know from Cambridge Analytica and all of the things that were just in The Social Dilemma, if you've watched it on Netflix, it's like that data is so important that it really can validate an idea. It can validate a project. So here I am, I'm working on these serial projects, the ones that accumulate 100, and it's audio, it's assets, it's audio and still photography, audio, still photography, over and over and over again. So this is in the back of my mind as I then approach working in the Subway series. Okay, so these are some of the portraits that I took of the blue chip artists. I got to photograph Nan Golden. That was really super cool. And John Baldessari and Catherine Opie. I mean, like, I almost passed out every single time I met these people. I just was so incredibly privileged. I'm so thankful. And then it was published into a book, and all of their portraits were published in this book, and it's available if you'd like to buy it. I don't make any money off of it, but it exists in book form. So this is the thinking that has me working in my mind, you know, like I'm doing this high-end imaging. The projects are validating the very nature of the importance of me working on imaging one by one in an editorial fashion. Like, it's very hard. I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but as like a commercial high-end photographer, like explaining that retouching something takes like over an hour to do, no one believes it, you know, no one believes it. But when you're actually working on a photograph of an artwork that is going to be disseminated across the world, that artwork is then going to be viewed by scholars that need to know exactly the color red that it is in the painting and exactly the color brown that it is in the painting. And otherwise they would be reacting to and writing about something that was incorrect. So I'm operating on this like high frequency of imaging, and I just sort of see this Instagram thing as like a futile thing. And then suddenly I was like, you need to get out of your rigid focus. And I pushed myself to do something that was low fidelity. So I was able to fundraise to publish the images in a book, and it was a strict output. It was literally intended to be a time capsule of how digital images were treated in this one particular software at this time. You know, Instagram will come and go and there'll be something else. And what I wanted to really just make permanent was the fact that it did this like kind of thing. It degraded the file. It made it into a compressed file. It made it a smaller file. And then I was trying to see how large I could push this file before it lost quality. So it turns out these files that were taken between 2012 and 2013, the files, all of them, all 300, actually I published 120 of them, and they could only go to 6 by 6 inches max before they began to fall apart. And even some of them actually started to show that fragmentation and that pixelization. But what was like the overwhelming end result of that was that even if it was low quality, and even if it was a shitty platform, it wasn't high end, the actual content of the images connected with people so well. It was like the human experience was undeniable. And it wasn't, it was fascinating worldwide, you know, and no matter what kind of fidelity it was still communicating that. And that was like really powerful to me, and it really enlightened me. So that's where I was operating from. So these are actually the files that were spit out by Instagram and saved to my phone after I took the images. These were all taken on an iPhone 4. And as I mentioned, they were only nice or good up until 6 by 6 inches. And then I completed the book. I stopped photographing on the subway until I published the book. That was like sort of like a rigid rule of mine. But in that time before I published it, which was in 2015, I acquired a new phone and basically a new camera. And I moved on to an iPhone 5, which PS, that phone camera is actually really good. And I miss it because it was like a very simple digital phone. And I could print the files that spit out to 44 by 60 inches, which is a mural sized print, of which that is a traveling exhibition that you can see in person. And there's hardly any deterioration to the like lines between contrast and everything. So these are, everything that's square is taken with an iPhone 4, and it was published in the book. So here's me trying to trick the system into giving me full frame. I like filled out the black at the top and the bottom. And as I said, this filter, it forced this border on. And I think this is really humorous to say to other photographers, is it tried to mimic a Polaroid border, but any professional photographer knows that this particular texture of a Polaroid is actually a medium format Polaroid, and it would never be square unless it had a crop from one of the slides that you would put into the Polaroid back. So this is what the book looks like. This is the front and the intro. And as I mentioned, this is 6 by 6, and I wanted to mimic the publication of Walker Evans's Passengers. I just wanted it to be very simple. But the secondary thing that I had, and I committed myself to, it was like, you know, you're gonna do this and you're gonna live with that file. You're not gonna change it. You're not gonna modify it for print. You're not gonna mess around with it. But also back in 2012, the captions were not changeable. You know, you entered that caption and it stayed there. And so I would always like put streams of consciousness. I would often put lyrics, and like there's a ton of typos in there. So I really committed. I was like, I'm not even gonna copy edit this. It's going straight up as it was, just so that it could be an honest portrayal of what I did and what I intended to happen. And so there's a large explanation about the project statement. There's a foreword by an artist by the name of Charles Bechtel. He's a wonderful, wonderful poet and author. And then I, of course, gave a little forever grateful to everybody that funded the project. So moving on after the publication in 2015, I started to want to explore different ways to print out the images, because guess what? These ones the full frame one that you see in front of you is actually on a silk screen. And now I was taking photographs on an iPhone 5. That quality was far superior to the iPhone 4. And Instagram was no longer compressing the files because they had unlimited storage. So the file output was just like actually so perfect to me, I had to mess it up. Like I wanted to see how many ways I could mess it up. So I started to create silk screens on Plexi. and try to layer the plexiglass so it would look like you were on the subway. So these are actually, as you can see, there's the same guy in the foreground and in the background, and I wanted to mimic that experience of how many different layers of humanity are like actually going on as you go to back and forth to work, which is for me was going back and forth to the Met, and that was from Williamsburg to the Upper East Side, and that was the L train to the 4-5 every day, same time. And guess what? Over all the years that I photographed this, I never ran into the same person twice except for one person. And that was from 2012 till 2016 that I did that. So it's really remarkable. But anyway, back to this plane of how, like these planes of existence that are just like sort of happening in front of you like it's a movie, you know? It's like, first of all, you got like a whole bunch of people that are on one platform and they're living that existence. Then there's people that are on the train car and they're living that existence. And then there might be another train going the other direction that's beyond that train. There's another level. And then there's another platform beyond that train. And at any given point, when there's 2 trains in the station, we're looking at 4 levels of experience. It's sort of like the timeline situation, you know, like timelines of different planes of existence kind of thing. And, you know, like even when you're on a separate car of the subway, as you look through the window into another car, that car is like in motion and bobbing up and down. And as you're looking through the window, again, it begins to feel like you're a voyeur of somebody else's life. So it printing on the plexiglass through using like a line art document, which is why there is like this deterioration in the pixels of the file, is me just trying to replicate this like experience of seeing so many different storylines going on at the same time. And I think, you know, like this is something we all just, you know, forget to accept, that we accept is that on each individual car, people are living out like maybe a musician coming through or somebody speaking loudly on their phone, and it's just like a theatrical experience on each different level. So this is like a phenomenon that I wanted to share in this complicated way, but also lo-fi way. So it's not, you know, it's not too like high art so that you can't grasp what's going on. So here's another depiction of that. This is the plexiglasses staggered as well. And so I also wanted to try printing on metal. These are actually dye sub on aluminum. What I really loved about it was its tin type quality, how it had like a warmer color to it. I've printed on aluminum dye bond before, and it's actually, you know, obviously it has a lot more detail, and it's not as soft as these, but I really thought that this had like a very intimate feel to it. So I would actually display the metal and then the plexiglass in front of it, and then actually see prints of the actual file. So it's like all different photographs on all different levels in an exhibition. So this is the printout on the dye sub, and this is the actual file. Now this file, this digital image is from an iPhone 5, and just look at the quality of the light, look at the quality of the shadows, and this is still pushed through that filter. And that filter is my choice because it doesn't do much other than to convert it to black and white. Whereas there's a couple of other filters that convert to what like is like a pseudo black and white. It kind of applies like a color or some other bias. This is just a straight conversion to grayscale for me. So more from the iPhone 5. And these are images that I printed as murals. They are very large format in output. And so I don't have any examples of this, but here, but I started to do large format plastic transparencies of these images to create cyanotypes as a direct contact from these digital negatives that I created. So I also do silver gelatin prints, contact prints from the large format digital negative, just to play around with like the different qualities of that output. So here's my book at Rough Trade Records, and this is Oh, actually, where is this? Yeah, that's Rough Trade. This is Rough Trade. This is at a boutique in Brooklyn. This is at the Met. They sold my book there. And I had a show at the Free Library of Philadelphia, and they published a little backstory about me because I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. Um, and I was living between here and there, up in Brooklyn, that is, for a long time, until December, actually. And so then yet another output, and I really love these. These are like a short run of zines that I actually sold at the Brooklyn Book Fair one year. And there's only 10 of each one of these, and so 30 total. And they have images in here from the series, and all of these were shot. These are the same ones that were shot on an iPhone 5. Okay, so I'm thinking in serial, I'm thinking in low fidelity, I'm thinking in different terms. I was invited to be part of a exquisite corpse exhibition, and I just decided to chop up the bodies, and that I was going to cut these and then recompose them somehow. But I actually like how they look all in a line to each other, so I started to sell the prints like this, and the harp is there for size and scale. And then I started to really mess around with the new feature in Instagram. At the time, it was, they just introduced the possibility of having video on Instagram. And off the bat, being that it was 15 seconds maximum and that it would crop again, I knew it was gonna go through a compression filter again, because they would run out of space on their servers. So I started to experiment with it, and I began to this was a video that was shot in slow motion, and I ended up posting it to Instagram, cropping it in different places of it, and then taking those outputted files of the video and then putting it into a film. It's a 4-minute film of which I wrote a musical score for, and for the first time ever, I'm going to be playing it at the Avant-Garde Short Film Festival here at Big Day Film Collective. So I'm super excited. I mean, I've been working on it forever. And I'm really happy to premiere it. So this is another portion of that same photo, like that same part of the film, but I had to move it down to fit in the square crop of Instagram. And as you can see, it's like compressing. So then I was approached by this musician, Deja Colantuano, and she asked me to make a video based off of the work that I do with Subway Series. And I basically went on the subway with her for about 2 hours before we went to a Pixies concert. And there's this one train, it's the 6 train, that after it gets to City Hall, it says it's the last stop, but really it just circles around back through this like empty closed station under under Borough Hall, I think. And you have the opportunity to just stay on the train by yourself. So I filmed her on the train in slow motion, and then compiled layers and layers and layers and layers of her on the subway in motion to create this like effect. And I could show that to you if we have time, because it's pretty cool. But as you can see, there's like 4 different layers of video footage. And so here's an example of the artwork on the murals on exhibition in Texas. Here's more of that. And then I wanted to talk about the women's right documentary. So I started my women's right documentary right after the 2016 election, out of fear of young women who grew up during the Obama presidency, never feeling the oppression of being a woman, because at the time it felt like women's rights was progressing, and that it felt safe. But I grew up at a time where there was people on the corner protesting the right to choice, and I was a little worried that younger women would be railroaded and have their rights taken advantage of. So I thought of doing a project where I would do 100 interviews with women, asking the same 5 questions, and then allowing them to talk about how they feel about women's rights and whether they felt that their rights were infringed upon. And so I accumulated 25 interviews, and I started at the Women's March in DC. And if you recall, the day before that march, there was a protest that many photographers and journalists were having their cameras confiscated. And I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with it, but there's a program called StoryCorps on NPR. And StoryCorps actually encourages people to hold interviews with their family and their friends for an hour and then upload it to their online archive, of which everything on their archive gets sent to the Library of Congress forever as part of their oral history library. And so the day before the Women's March on DC, StoryCorps sent around an email that said, hey, you guys, here's an idea. Why don't you conduct interviews on the march, upload it directly to StoryCorps, and it's automatically archived, and you won't have to worry about your materials getting confiscated. So as I'm on my way down to DC, I've got all of my gear with the intention to conduct the interviews. You know, like I had the phone numbers on my arms and, you know, emergency contacts, but I also had my you know, like all of my gear on my body. And then back at the location I was staying at, I went home and immediately and uploaded everything to the cloud so that nothing could ever be confiscated if where I was staying was actually going to be like busted or whatever. So that began my thinking of working in the multimedia for my own projects. And there's such a huge benefit to having your audio stored in the oral history library of the Library of Congress. All of that audio becomes searchable and usable, not only on StoryCorps, but for research purposes. So I conducted the Women's History project, and what I found was that while I could take high-end digital photographs, because these were all photographed on a Nikon, and I received a grant to help me make sure that I had a high-end digital camera. While I could totally photograph and control that I was shooting on a high-end camera, I couldn't really control the fidelity of my audio recordings. Like one person, I had to take advantage of interviewing her when she was available, and we literally met at a coffee shop, and in her interview, you can hear like a coffee grinder in the background. So I had to force myself to let go again. But the value of having the images next to the audio was so important to me that I wouldn't compromise, and I wouldn't risk losing an important interview just because it was low fidelity. So I recorded a lot either on my computer directly to Audacity or to my iPhone into the voice memo, and then I would upload straight to StoryCorps right after it became searchable and archived in the Library of Congress. So here's some images from the actual march and some of the people that I interviewed. And so these are a variety of different marches, and I would walk up to women and ask if I could interview them and record them. And then I traveled from here to Texas, and I conducted several interviews while I was in Texas as well. And I'm trying to think of where. So it's New York, Philadelphia, DC, Maryland, and McAllen, Texas, Mission, Texas, and basically the Rio Grande area where I had my residency soon after this. And so this is what like the interface looks like for StoryCorps archive, and this is kind of like how you can see the audio and the images, and I'm sure you recognize that it looks a lot similar, like very similar to the Met projects now. And so now these are interactive online features that I'm able to do by myself and for my own and with my own production, as long as I don't want to get all fancy pants about my high fidelity recordings. All right, so as I mentioned, I was working on that project, and then I received an actual residency in McAllen, Texas, and I was given the freedom to work on anything that I wanted for 2 months straight. And I worked on 6 projects while I was there, one of which is the cyanotype project. And at the time, it was called the People of the Rio Grande Valley Border Towns. And McAllen is the very town that Trump often talks about as being like a war zone, and that there are, you know, drug lords and drug corrals, and that are just like, I just remember while I was there, and like an actual piece on NPR came out, and I was listening to them talk about the very space I was in, and I was like looking around, and I'm like, they're making it seem like there's active warfare here, and it's literally a place where people live, grow up, love, and have families. And I became very upset with the fact that their stories were being modified by whoever wanted to twist the story. You know, like the media would come down and talk about the wall, or the media would come down and talk about border patrol, or the media would talk about like whatever's happening within Mexico and how that's an affront. But they neglected to allow for anything but more than a soundbite or a quote. And I felt like this is an opportunity to also conduct interviews in long form, and with people who are immigrants, descendants of immigrants, and people who are seeking citizenship and residency in the United States, or people who are actually didn't have any papers at all. And so I was thinking about how I could document that without a darkroom, because film is my preferred medium. And I didn't have a darkroom, and nor did I have a digital darkroom, but I did have my digital cameras and I had my film cameras. But I wanted to do sort of like a bigger, more ethereal type of portrait. And so I thought, not only is it pretty beautiful to have a body as an imprint, it also provides anonymity for anyone that needed to speak about immigration with candidness. And so there's several interviews, though the majority people gave me permission to use their name, there are several where people wanted to remain anonymous because of fear of repercussion. So the idea was always proposed to the participant, and I said, let's have a meeting. I want to talk about who you are, and you know, like why you want to be a part of the project, and what you feel are like objects that might identify you. Because for cyanotype, as you all probably are familiar with, you place an object on the coated material, and then whatever blocks out the sun, whatever's on top of it remains white, and any part of the material that is revealed to the sun turns a bright Prussian blue, and it only takes water to process it. So it's a very simple historic process, and I wanted to put objects onto the fabric so that it could be meaningful, and even sort of something that if their family saw it, they'd be like, oh, I know that, I know who that is. You know, I know that that's a net. Or so it became a lot about symbolism. And then what's really beautiful is that like the, you know, need for looking beautiful or dressing up perfectly or putting on makeup completely disappeared, you know, from the whole entire portrait story. It was about the form, and that was it. And their hair, you know. So the way that this would go, this is what they look like on Governor's Island. This was the body of work straight after I went from Texas. And after I went to Texas, I then went to Mexico. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened after I went to Mexico. But so what was I about to say? I forget. I feel like I really do feel like I'm speaking into a void, and I hope that you're all still there. But what I love about this is that this was on Governor's Island, which is basically at the time was like an arts mecca. And there were always these art fairs. There's no cars. You have to get there by ferry. And people would just go there for the summer. And these people, it was so amazing because I was sort of sitting far away. And then I was playing guitar with my friend, and I looked up and there were people having a picnic in between the artwork. And I was just like, yes, this is what I want. And so the idea is that it's artwork that's outside that people can walk in and around while they experience the sound of audio, like an audio reel of the interview. So sadly, I had to sort of edit down some of the audio so that I could have a reel that would loop on the exhibition. But all of the audio interviews that are on StoryCorps are completely unedited. And in fact, you'll hear me like, you know, trying to coax the person to be a little bit more open, or you know, I sort of like would feign a little bit of ignorance just so that they would have to explain a little bit more about something that I already knew. But it's all long form, and like some of it's boring, I'll be honest with you. One of the people just was telling me about how she grew up as like a pageant queen, and how she had a terrible relationship. And what I want you to get out of that, and what I want everybody to get out of this project, is to identify with the form, to, relax the mind and open it to different ideas of thinking about who it might be, and to then identify with the person just based on the human form, and then realize, they're not the other, they are us. So there's this like, so here's the crying. Somebody talk to me. Somebody talk to me, because this is the emotional part. It's, we treat immigration, or I can't speak for everybody, but like in the news, it's like it's them and it's their problem and they're doing this and this, that, and the other thing. Well, my family is a family of immigrants from Italy. And, we were afforded opportunities, and I believe everybody deserves those opportunities. So it's really important for me that people connect and relax and just understand and see that these stories, the pageant queen is just like any other person in a neighborhood, and they're going through their trials and their tribulations and raising their family just like everybody. And they're not, it's not them. So to move on, this is the project in Mexico, hanging outdoors at the Guapamacatero Arts and Ecological Center. And this is the ideal situation for the installation of these views. And on this Saturday, on World Cyanotype Day, I'm going to have them outside of Big Day Film Collective for people to walk in and among them as well. And so as I went to visit my cousins in Italy, they were following along on my immigration project quite closely. And my cousin, my younger cousin, who's like 27 years old, he said, like he is perfectly aware that my family had to leave the very village and town that he grew up in because of, the streets were paved with gold. There was a better and more opportunity. And essentially, my family had to leave that family because of poverty, or because we needed to make more money. And so, he shared a compassion with that, and he said, we're actually facing a similar situation in Italy with asylum seekers. And why have you considered exploring the idea of working with asylum seekers? So I reached out to a couple of people who work with immigrants and asylum seekers in Italy. And I began to work on that project as an exploration into the idea of and risk that it takes to cross over into another country for more health and better health, more happiness, and all the desires that all of us have. So the very country that my family felt they needed to leave is the very country that the asylum seekers and immigrants to Italy are finding salvation. So this is like a struggle, and an idea I really wanted to explore. And so I was able to do 12 interviews in Italy. And so this is an asylum seeker camp in Calabria, Italy. So these are just more images. So I know that you guys are probably familiar with cyanotypes, but this is some of the process of me doing the exposure. It was anywhere between 10 minutes and 30 minutes. And it was 120 degrees in June while I was down there, and they were really troopers. And as you can tell, this person is a coffee roaster, and this person is a painter. And then this is just me after I have washed it down and developed it with water. And this is when I went to Italy to do the work. I didn't have as many facilities to work with, but we were working on the outskirts of Milan. I literally traveled in an airplane with coated fabric and lots of trash bags and deep inside of a suit bag and everything. And then I traveled all the way out on the subway there to the outskirts of Milan. and onto a farm that had like a spigot outside of one of the barn buildings. And I got to work with all different types of immigrants, one from Cuba, one from Peru, and these two women are actually two teenagers that were born in Italy that are not permitted to become citizens, but their parents are Egyptian. And this is how it turned out. And so I just believe that these are really wonderful portraits of the individual and participants. And I'd use some tricks as I do the exposure to change the composition during the exposure. But the person basically has to immediately lay down within the first 10 seconds and then allow me to move them around and trust me. And this is an exhibition that was held on the border of Mexico. And how this is on view at the Venice Biennale in a collateral exhibition last year. And this is at the Halide Project that Del Rio is the board director of in Philadelphia. And then this is my coordinator. She's like the fixer in Milan. Her name's Yorita. And she herself wrote a book that's called Your Story is My Story, essentially exploring the same idea as I'm exploring, which is I'm not so different than you, you're not so different than me, and I need to insist upon policy that reflects that. And so here we are, we're literally recording right next to the Duomo in Milan. And you'll hear the sound in the background. And so this is what it looks like on StoryCorps. All the audio interviews are unedited up there as well. And when it was anonymous, I would just do a thumbnail that included several of the pieces. And that's my mom. So I thought that would be quick, but I was wrong. And I'm sorry about that. But one thing I want to introduce you guys to are the tools of the multimedia that I use. So I have several different projects that I store on StoryCorps. And let's see what I've got for you here. Okay, so StoryCorps allows you to just upload in a sequential fashion. So you can see I have 78 interviews, and you can go back in time sequentially all the way back to the first interview that I've done. But there's a way to organize your interviews, and it's actually in what they call communities. So you would create a community, and then you would basically assign your interviews into that community, and it essentially becomes like a gallery for that community, right? So I have crossing over immigration stories. I had a residency in Philadelphia in a neighborhood called Tacony, and the idea was we would have an oral history with these portrait cyanotypes about this small, really remarkable little section of Philadelphia. And then of course I had my women's rights documentary. But looking here to the left, I have the Corona Collective. Now, as soon as my classes had to shift online in March, I had this one class that was 8 hours long, and we would go on to locations throughout New York City, and we no longer could do that. So I had to refocus what I was going to do with my students, and they're very talented. This was out of the New York Film Academy, and they're all very talented, and they are all really eager to continue to shoot. So it was my proposal to them to say, hey, listen, here's an opportunity to use my expertise for you to learn how to work in a production environment. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put together a theoretical collective of our experiences. We're going to chronicle this, and we're going to conduct interviews, and we're going to take photographs or create artworks that support those interviews. And we're going to work together exactly like we might if this was a production that would be published online. And then I'm going to create a website. We're going to upload it to StoryCorps, and we're going to have an Instagram that depicts what we're going through as we're going through, and it will act as a time capsule. So it really worked very well, but each one of the students had to propose how they were going to create imagery. Were they going to be able to photograph, or were they going to take pictures on the screens of their monitors? Were they going to make a collage? They had to propose how they were going to create imagery. And then we all agreed on overlapping questions that we would ask in our interview so we could draw a thread between them all. And then we could just sort of branch out how we wanted to on our own. So the results are that I created a community. I did the project alongside of them just to encourage them so that they wouldn't feel like they're alone. It was very hard to teach my students in watching their faces go through uncertainty, depression, anxiety, and a lack of direction, and then the conversion to digital was just such a huge leap, because they didn't have all their materials at home. So it was like, this was a saving grace, and to have me working with them really gave them a lot of support in a way. So you'll see this is my first image, and I photographed business owners in my local neighborhood of Collingswood. And my student Lila started to do interviews of her family. Now these interviews are so incredible. I really recommend. It turns out her mother had 17 siblings, and she wanted to start to interview them all, as many as she could during coronavirus, because everybody was home, you know? So what she would ask her mom to do is her mom would go through the box of photographs in her closet and take a phone photograph, and she would crop it and do a little coloration. This one needed a little bit of work, as you can see. This photographer actually started to make collages out of screen captures. She asked her participants what their favorite food was, what their favorite movie was, and then her idea was that she was going to put the flag of the country they were from behind them, but it turns out she interviewed most of her friends from Uruguay anyway, so they all have the flag from Uruguay. And then this is me doing interviews with my students. So what I did is I took a screen capture of them on Zoom, and I included their photographs just sort of all over my desktop, and I took a screen capture, and that's their portrait. So it really worked out well as a way to think in both low fidelity, high fidelity, and then sort of busting the construct of what a portrait could be. And I think that's it. I mean, actually, I really do want to give a big shout out to a couple of cyanotype artists that I'm noticing online that are exploring the body imprint. So this actual student, I think he's actually a graduate student that just recently graduated over the last 6 months. And he is really doing some amazing art, exploring historical processes. But it was obviously this artwork that caught my eye, because not only is it a fabric cyanotype, not only is it an imprint of a body, a couple of bodies, it is literally a piece about social change, for social change. So this is the first other person that I've seen using cyanotype in a similar fashion. Now he's using strong symbolism here, of which, you know, I feel is very powerful. And how did I see his work? He was part of an outdoor exhibition, and he was on the cover of a local newspaper down in Charleston, and my friend who lives down there, who knew my work, sent it to me. I reached out to him immediately, and I hope that we can work together on an exhibition. And then there's this photographer that I found by way of her liking one of my cyanotype images, and I just began to scroll through her work, and I'm absolutely in love with this work that she's doing of birds. You know, obviously it's the form of the body as a cyanotype, and of course, unfortunately and sadly, the bird has died. So she has a series of birds that she's finding. So I think that this is a really inspiring way to think about a medium that was basically invented to, you know, Sir John Herschel, he invented cyanotype, and he invented it so that he could replicate his notes. But it was Anna Atkins that then appropriated it and created, she was the, you know, the first female photographer who then chronicled botanicals with it. And so it became a cataloging method. And so most of the cyanotypes that I see are of botanicals or of shapes. But I also see people doing work where they get a digital negative and they make a contact sheet with cyanotypes as well. So, hi, there's everybody's faces again. Hi. It's good to see you all. I'm glad I didn't cry too much. All right, so how was that?
That was great.
Awesome.
Could you just mention the name of the second person that you showed so I can stick the link in the...
Sure. Okay, so it's Bootsy Holler. And if you want me to put that in the chat, I'm
Yeah, that'd be
happy to.
great.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. So I wasn't able to follow the chat while I was talking, but were there any questions in there? Bravissima, grazie, prego. Grazie mille, thank you.
There were amazing and incredible and beautiful comments, which I will absolutely make sure you get a copy of that text since you weren't able to see the chat as you were going. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? We welcome you to either type it in the chat window or you can unmute yourself if you'd rather ask it in person. Anybody have some questions?
I'm trying to scroll all the way back up, but I can't find any.
Yeah, I didn't see any questions come through and they are just...
So what do you all think about low fidelity and just like exploring different, you know, ways that are imperfect but connect with people because of a lower sort of barrier of entry conceptually? I mean, like maybe it's not that low.
Well, I mean, I think it's completely accessible, and it's interesting because 6 feet, you know, when we first started, we thought this was going to be a very short thing, a few months, and none of us knew how to run Zoom, and we weren't web designers, and we were this sort of ragtag team of volunteers. And one of the things we had to decide early on is that if we're going to make this happen, we've got to agree to just live with imperfection. And actually, I think, you know, like even when you talk about even in the process of where we break into that deep emotional place for ourselves or where we're connected with the work, I think that vulnerability and honesty is what makes the work powerful.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think the imperfection in a way creates an opening that is just really, really lovely.
Thank
Can
you.
I agree? I'd like to agree with that. I mean, I really feel like a lot of artists get caught up in this idea of high fidelity, which is, in my mind, kind of a filter between your subject and yourself.
Yeah.
And in some ways, with photography in particular, and the kind of cyanotypes you're doing where it's body on fabric,
Yeah.
I feel like that connection is really important. And I feel like you know, you can match the fidelity with the subject matter, and I don't think it needs to always be, you know, high craft. I think we get trapped in that high craft notion, but that's a box, you know. It's not. It doesn't always have to apply. You know, it applies to some things beautifully and perfectly, but other things not as well. You know.
Right. Thank you. That I like to hear that. Yeah. I really I'm happy to it's interesting. I've been given the class of teaching history of photography in New York, and I'm not a scholar. I'm a photographer who now has a pretty vast knowledge of the history of photography, but I was charged with teaching history of photo and the ways of seeing. And I know, I feel like we've talked about this in one of the other meetings, but the ways of seeing is basically challenging all of the constructs of appreciation of visual arts, and how it was basically formed around the Renaissance and like white male pleasures, you know. And so how we perpetuate these constructs to this day, how they're echoed in our advertisements and everything. So I love that part of teaching this particular class, because I'm asking my students to push the constructs, you know, and I have this large appreciation for when my students are open to like just messing around and not being, you know, like there's times for perfection, you know. And I think history of photo and ways of seeing is one of those classes that's sort of like yeah, why don't you mess around with the whole idea of what it meant to have a sepia tone print, you know, or, and why can't I do that? You know, like, why am I held to a stricter standard? Well, I'm not. It's just me putting that rule on myself, you know? So, but then, I mean, like, that extends to this amazing fact that when I worked at the Met, the video editors are just the highest echelon of artistry. I mean, like, I'm just working with, like, I was, you know, and of course in like the New York photo scene and working in commercial world, everything's just like so high end and everybody's like operating on this high frequency. And it's just like, I want to relax a little bit so that I can feel a little bit more fluid. You
I
know?
like what Man Ray says, that it's really just expanding the language. And so there's different ways of speaking. There's different modes of speaking that you're using. There's not one that's better than the other. There's one that's maybe better than the other in a given circumstance, but
Yeah.
there's not one that's overall better. It's all language. It's all ways of speaking. And, you know, if you can pick one that's closer to what you want to say and what you want to convey, it doesn't matter what it is, I don't
Yeah.
think, you know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope so. In other words, you know, like none of the video editors at the Met will ever take my audio and like edit it down with any sort of like seriousness. So I see a
Yeah,
question.
so we've got Ellen's ready to jump in, and then we've
Oh,
got a
cool.
couple of questions in the chat. Go ahead, Ellen.
Hi. So one of the things I was thinking, I come from a painting background. I mean, I also graduated in photography, but one of the things I've been seeing is this like tend towards like ultra realism in watercolors that can be that can look photorealistic.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've been thinking about like your comments on lo-fi in relationship to these like divergent mediums that are doing, you know, two very different things but looking very similar in the end. And I don't even know that there's a question here. Like I was just like, it's been like, I've been fascinated by these like watercolorists who are like trying to make things look like photographs, as perfectionist photographs, versus using the technology of painting to look like painting.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I can't, here's the thing is, and I'm so willing to be like, oh, wow, why don't they just keep it as a photograph? It's like literally like taking away from the quality of the nature of the photograph. And it's so obviously not a photograph to me that I would like, I'm sort of like, my first reaction would be, yeah, I don't really like that. And that's exactly how I felt about Instagram. I was just like, ugh, what are you guys doing? But I think that medium, Instagram, eventually hit a stride of usefulness and was done well after a certain point. You know, I think it, you know, like we could probably go down the whole conversation about how there's so much shitty photography on Instagram, but then there's every single photographer I know, it posts to it and I get to see some really amazing work to it. And if you just kind of like isolate the rest, you see this phenomenal stuff. So if we're talking about watercolors, like if I were a watercolorist, I would be like, well, like, why are you doing that? And then as a photographer, I'm like, why are you doing that? But it's busting a construct. And once like somebody does it well and different, and maybe even applies it to an overall narrative with a subtext, I kind of feel like we'll be able to find a value in it in a way. You know, it takes like a sort of shift. You know, I don't know. How do you guys feel?
Well, I just wanted to just do a quick shout out that when you're looking at sort of busting these narratives around how photography can be used, I stuck a couple of links of two folks that are on the call tonight, Susan Martin, who we just heard from a minute ago, who does these incredible sculptures that are photo-based.
Oh my God.
So her link is there. And then Catherine Day is on the call, and she's doing these incredible pieces, lo-fi sort of capture on linen that are just absolutely stunning. So if you're looking for a couple more examples, yeah.
Oh, Susan, do you know the artist Stephen Panicasio? He does work like this, just not as literal. I see what you're doing. So you have photographic prints back there, and then you've done some like cutting of other photographs and started to layer them on top of each other, then re-photographed it on textured materials, right?
You talking to me?
For
Susan,
Catherine
yeah.
or Susan Martin? Yeah.
Susan Martin.
Susan Martin. Well, I make three-dimensional sculptures, basically.
Yeah.
And then re-photograph them. So they exist both in three ways. They exist as original images, they exist as sculptural pieces, and then they exist as images of the sculptures. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Oh my God, my brain just blew up. That's amazing. Yeah, well, Stephen.
Sorry, my website's really hasn't been updated in a long time. I got a ton of stuff to add, but.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
And wow, and oh my God, Catherine. Yeah, this is so perfect.
I know, right? And so I
Sharing.
want to just go back to, somebody had a question up here, which I think it was just like when you're getting started, just beginning to mess with cyanotypes, you know, sort of tips for getting started and yeah. Oh, and I was just going to back up for just a second and say this other little piece, which I think is, you know, interesting, which is sometimes we think of lo-fi as like casual or messy or disrespectful even sometimes. And I think it's a different thing to use those tools, but in a thoughtful and respectful and considerate way, because they're tools that give us access versus just being kind of sloppy and lazy. And I think sometimes people connect those two and conflate those two unnecessarily, where lo-fi can be a really thoughtful and considerate way to engage. It's not because it was, you had nothing, you know, it's not because you couldn't go do it differently. It's because it's a choice that you make.
Right.
Leave some vulnerability in the process.
Yep. So back to the tips for cyanotypes. You will be so surprised at how easy it is to do. What I suggest as the number one tip is just do it. And all you need is chemistry that's so easy to buy online and mix in your home bathroom. The most difficult thing is that you have to coat the paper in a darkened room. It can't be in a room where there's sunlight, because sunlight actually begins the exposure. You could buy, I would suggest starting with pre-coated paper and just putting some objects in it, put it out into the sun for 30 minutes, then process in a water bath tray. You can use one of those like catering aluminum foil trays for water. It's non-toxic, so you can do it pretty much anywhere. You know, like every now and again, you'll see somebody actually develop their cyanotype in the ocean and people begin to freak out and stuff, but technically it's non-toxic. So it's so simple, but what the next tip I would give you is try not to be rigid about what you put in contact with the treated cyanotype material. So the next thing I would do is, if you are a digital photographer, I would enlarge a digital photograph and invert it onto a digital transparency and print it out through your inkjet printer or a laser printer, and then expose a cyanotype. If you're familiar with making test strips, definitely start by doing a timed sequence so that you can figure out how long you need to expose that negative to the cyanotype, and then make one final exposure. And I actually really feel like that is like one of the moments where you're just sort of, it's just like being in the dark room with film, and you put your print in the developer and it appears suddenly. You're like, ah, my God, I did this, you know? And I connect with that so much more than printing a digital photograph through an inkjet printer, you know, and having a C print. So that is the next tip I would tell you to do. And then if you wanted to work in fabric, there's just like a couple of things that you have to think about with fabric. It can't have any softener on the fabric. You want to make sure if you wash the fabric that it's been washed in something that doesn't have a scent on it or any extra chemicals. just because that creates sort of like a sheen, like a Scotch guard to the fabric, and therefore the cyanotype chemistry can't really attach itself to the fabric, and you would need to use a non-synthetic fabric. If you have polyester, it slides right off when you actually process it in the water development. My question is washing the fabric after. I made a whole lot of napkins that last week turned white. I know you need special detergent. What about cotton? So I've done it on cotton, and I've washed t-shirts, and it remains there. Now, the theory is, and you'll hear this from people who print fabric designs, is that the actual color blue is literally one of the colors that fades the least in the sun. But you know, the process of washing anything over and over has a degrading quality to it. So my cyanotypes, I literally met with Nora Kennedy at the Met, and the recommendation is to not wash it, and to put it in darkness and storage, keep it away from humidity as much as possible. Now, that being said, it was hanging in Venice for 6 months between the spring into the fall, and it went through an expansion and a contraction, expansion and contraction. But, you know, the thing about cyanotype is that it might lighten, but once you store it again, it actually regenerates. It's weird.
I love that about it.
Yeah, it's so cool to read that stuff. It's like it's alive. So it says if you spray with peroxide, it gets more intense. Could that have bleached it in the wash? Now, the peroxide, it's interesting. I don't have such great results with that. I feel like that just makes the development and saturation of the blue happen more rapidly. I don't have any experience with it like bleaching the fabric. Now, I belong to like 2 groups on Facebook. It's basically the only reason I'm even on there anymore, that and Ellen, who's here. So they go in and out of saying use peroxide, don't use peroxide or whatever. And in the end, I feel like it's totally a matter of preference, you know? Almost all of my work doesn't include peroxide, but there are a few cyanotypes that, check this out. So this is kind of wild, and I'm not sure if anyone else experienced it, but there were five people that I wanted to put on one fabric cyanotype, and it was 4 children, and the mother. And the only time she could arrive was later in the day. And out of all of the cyanotypes I made, it was like 1 of 2 that I made after 1 p.m. When the intensity of the sun began to lessen. And the Prussian blue literally looked like a pale blue. And I was hoping I could make it in post, you know, like I processed it in water, but then I was just like trying to really get the blues to pop more. And they say peroxide would do it, and it just didn't, you know. I feel like there was going back to multimedia, are you still experimenting with video, and how do you feel video can achieve this human connection versus print and audio? That's a great question, because in a way, when it's straightforward video, when I'm watching a straightforward video that's a documentary, I'm engaged in a way that's very like intellectual and informational. And so like my ultimate goal with a lot of this work is to sort of push into this like dreamlike abstract state where we're no longer thinking in a formal way. So the videos themselves are very abstract, and they're distorted, and they're intended to be so that it can be a similar challenge to, you know, to watch the piece. So like my video in Subway series was hugely informed by James Nair's, his piece on Street. Has anyone seen Street at the Met or anything, or as it traveled? So he took a camera, he rented a van, had a production crew, and he had a Phantom Flex camera, which would capture, I think, 100 frames a second as he drove through the streets of New York City. And he then edited down all of these vignettes of that experience into like a 59-minute video. And it's all slow motion. And because it's shot like that at that frame rate, it became hyper real. And it became like this surreal experience. Like I say that I'm privileged to have worked at the Met. I literally, they projected that piece on a whole entire wall in the galleries. And I had the privilege of going there several times after hours and laying on the floor and just watching it. And I just felt like I could jump like straight into it. So that inspired my work with the video part of Subway series. I video recorded it at like a slower frame rate, and then played it out. And so it was incredibly slow. I could play it for you if you wanted. But the other part of that James Nair's piece is that he had Thurston Moore from, oh my God, why am I spacing? Ellen, help me. It's not Social Distortion. Ellen's not there anymore. You're muted. Thurston Moore is with
Sonic Youth.
Sonic Youth, yes, thank you. I knew it was an S. Thanks, Bill. I'm sure Bill was.
It was Bill. I just heard.
Her husband's a musician. So, but anyway, Thurston. Yeah, okay. So Thurston Moore actually had a 12-string acoustic guitar and played a live score to the piece, and that was the overlay. And I got to see this actual projection in our theater at the Met with Thurston Moore there playing live a totally different score. And so that's my inspiration for the score for my piece. It's 4 minutes long. And again, I returned to this low fidelity thing because I was kind of hitting a roadblock. I was like, well, I'm not a great musician. I'm not a professional. So I'm going to record this in a lo-fi way and just accept the fact that how this recording turns out. And so that's how I did it. And it does have like a similar quality because actually there's this recording of Thurston Moore's where he's just this abstract or experimental and punk from the Lower East Side of New York. And he has this piece where he goes, this is what it sounds like when you put a cup down. This is what it sounds like when you spray Lysol. This is what, and that's like the whole song. So he blew my mind. I'm like, oh, he's doing these like little sound bites of like things that we take for granted in life, you know? Oh, bye, Marie. I'm so sorry. Thank you for saying goodbye. So video for me right now yeah, John Cage would approve. Yeah, I reference John Cage all the time. Video for me is not my profession. You know, like I think when you get hired as a photographer now, they almost always ask you to do video so that they could do like these pieces on Instagram. And, you know, it's not my interest, you know. I don't know, how do you guys feel? See, it's Sophia, if she's still here, she's probably like, yeah, there she goes again. There she is. Sophia, are you still working in cyanotypes?
Yeah, I was going to say something. I was going to say, so Jackie, she was my professor last semester, and after all quarantine went down, like we all went online, and that was a difficulty. And I think it still is being a photographer. But I remember I took an alternative process class the semester before, and I was obsessed with cyanotype, and I always had this idea of like, I want to go bigger. Like this is like getting boring for me, like doing tiny things. And I wanted to make this, you know, we're using like 11x14 contact printers. And my project for the summer was making a huge one with my father. And I did that. And
Yeah.
I remember emailing Jackie at the end of the semester. And I was like, Jackie, like I was researching online of like everything you need to know about doing large cyanotypes. And you came across and I was like, holy shit, like that's my professor. Like, do you remember me emailing you?
Yeah, I totally remember. I was like, oh, you're gotta be kidding. Someone had to tell you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of like, I saw that and I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, I know someone, you know, it feels more comfortable for me to ask her like these questions instead of like someone who might never respond. And, you know, that was I'm still doing them. I working on a series right now, but
what's the series like?
it's just like of gas stations, and I'm printing like large digital negatives. Chris was helping me print them. I first started out tiling, which I thought would be cool, like tiling, 8x10 negatives, like printing them out on my own printer. But after a while, you're like, I just want a nice, clean print. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, awesome. And I just wanted to say thank you. Like,
of course.
like you have someone you can just like.
Totally. I hope you can make it over to Big Day, because I'm actually working on a new cyanotype project, which I'm struggling with because it's an extension of this immigration project. I'm continuing, I have like 2 residencies waiting for me in Italy once I get funding and once I'm able to travel again to continue the portraits and the audio interviews. But in talking it over with a lot of people, I really need to do a larger exploration of the immigration of my family and what that means to me in relation to these new immigration policies, and how I feel about how Italian Americans are really portraying themselves in the midst of all these protests in Philadelphia, where my family immigrated to. So I'm struggling with mine because I'm not, I love to celebrate the form, and I feel like I don't want to put too much negative imagery on the cyanotype. So I'm starting to work with digital negatives and silhouettes. And I don't know, it'd be nice to just like kind of meet up with a bunch of people and just sort of like play around and talk about it. Oh, so Gray Lines interview, is that that's a person who does very large cyanotype? So, I mean, like the weirdest part is while I was working on my residency, it's amazing. It's totally amazing. But while I was down there, MoMA had a Rauschenberg exhibition, and they had a cyanotype of like bodily forms in there. And someone sent me a photograph and said, "Look, did you know about this?" And that, like, it was. I mean, it's wild to me because somebody compared the plexiglass prints to a Rauschenberg piece before, and then this was being compared to Rauschenberg. And after the first connection with Rauschenberg, I started to delve into the library at the Met, and I realized I had to stop because I was going to suddenly start to influence what I wanted to do based on what I was seeing by Rauschenberg, instead of being like self-inspired. So I stopped doing research. But Rauschenberg did large format cyanotypes as well. I'm going to check out that link. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. This is amazing. So what's awesome is that, so I went to visit Nora Kennedy at the photo conservation lab at the Met, and I was showing her my work, and she had just gone to a conference where she was like talking about the Rauschenberg cyanotype. And it was amazing because she was like, they posed a question, the audience posed this question as to how he achieves a certain look in the form. And she's like, I couldn't answer that. And I said, oh, well, that was actually because some part of the body was wet. And it began to develop because the people who were laying on my cyanotype started to sweat.
Right.
And that sweat began to develop the cyanotype. And it's super cool how that like falls out. And so this example that was just shown that you showed, Susan, I guess it's Gray Lines. This person is wet as they lie on top of the cyanotype. And so it begins to develop in the form of the bathing suit and the legs and everything.
Yeah, it's Linda Lyons and Gray Lyons, they're a couple, and they work together, and Linda does the small pieces, and they do these very large installation work together. And
oh man,
yeah, they do. And it's true, they actually choose the summer, and Linda was the subject for a long time, and they would want it to be like the hottest possible day. So there would be lots of sweating, and the salt in the sweat would start to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so like there's one of my cyanotypes actually has a freshly slaughtered chicken on it because I wanted to see what blood and iron would, because there's like this reaction when the sun hits the cyanotype that kind of transforms the compound into some sort of like iron substance. I was like, I want to see iron on iron, and it's pretty cool.
Did you see Catherine Day's comment?
No,
The
where?
Rauschenberg image that we're talking about was actually very much the work of his then wife,
Yeah.
Susan Wheel.
Well, guess what? She was in attendance at this lecture that I was talking about, and Susan didn't have an answer. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Thank you. I couldn't think of her name off the top of my head, which is pretty bad. But I am a little nervous still. So I'm sorry, I still can't get through all these comments. I feel like I've missed
I
it.
think well, I will definitely send you all the comments. It's great to read through them. I think I've been catching all the questions, but if anybody's here and is sitting on one last question that you didn't get a chance to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself. And just a little shout out.
I'm just wondering if you can post
Yeah.
the links somewhere too to all the websites,
To all the what?
because I don't have time to catch them. Oops.
Oh, the chats, you mean? The chat links.
Susan Martin? Yes.
Yes. And just to let you know, 6 Feet has added another section. We have practice groups, of course, which many of you know about and participated in, but we are starting skill shares, and we might just get crazy on Saturday and do a live skill share for cyanotype, since it's World Cyanotype Day.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
not, we have a couple of people who have agreed to do some skill shares later in the month. So just keep an eye on that website. And if you're not already signed up for our newsletter, just head on over there and do that. And then the skill shares are always free. They're artists just teaching to other artists. And they'll usually give you an hour, hour and a half of their time and live walk you through from a distance some process. So like Allison Aliano is doing her digital organizing process in Lightroom for the next 2 weeks. And so you just sign up and jump on at that Zoom time, and then you get to spend the afternoon. So we will be inspired to think about more cyanotype skill shares in the future.
Cool. Also, I wanted to just tell you that I'm having an avant-garde short film festival after the display of the cyanotypes on Saturday. So, and I'm hoping to hang at least 20 of them outdoors. Wow. So if you tune into my Instagram, you'll see pictures of it, and I'll put it in the chat, but it's Jackie Photog is my handle. Man, I could talk about this stuff all day. It's like ridiculous. I literally taught until like 3:30, and here I am, blah, 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 blah. I'm really thankful and grateful for this opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it so much. And Jackie will actually be back. We're still working out the dates with Del Rio and a couple of other folks who are going to be talking about film-based work. So doing film photography and why they're still choosing those processes. And so we're super excited about that. So we'll be seeing Jackie again.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yay. All right, what do we do now?
Well, we say goodnight.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Good night.
You're so great. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.